Hello fellow Herders of the Blue, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to the second of a series of videos focused on the most basic aspects of the hobby. You might think that this video is not for you, but I encourage you to watch it. You might learn something new or pick a tool or trick you didn't know. In this video we're going to focus solely on gap filling, exploring the tools you will need as well as the different types of filling materials and how to use them in the best and most efficient way possible. I really hope that by the end of this video you have the best understanding possible of all the gap filling options so you can pick the best one for your application. And talking about the best applications, look your best applying one of today's video sponsor, Into the Am t-shirts, on your magnificent body. Into the Am is a trusted brand that lives and breathes creativity and self-expression. They see clothing as a canvas to express what drives you. Since 2012, they've developed premium apparel that elevates self-expression and provides unparalleled comfort for wherever your passions take you. I've had these t-shirts for about a month now, and let me tell you, they are by far my most favorite t-shirts now. I wear them everywhere. At an airport. And also teaching a masterclass. And even in a haunted house in Hamburg. They are super comfortable, the fabric feels premium, and the print quality is actually amazing. Did I mention they are made with eco-friendly inks? Click the link in the description and get 10% off on these premium made tees. But not only that, right now Into the Am is running their Labor Day discounts with up to 50% discounts on top of the 10% you get for using my link. Yes, the discounts stack. Don't miss this unique opportunity. Thanks Into the Am for sponsoring this video and for these super cool t-shirts. Let's get cracking. First things first, let's talk about materials and tools that I recommend you having. I will say like a bare minimum of things. This is what I usually use, my favorite ones, especially regarding tools, because you can have millions of those. And these are my two types of putty that I generally use. There are all ways of filling gaps. This is not meant to be like a complete guide on gap filling with all options and all of that stuff. This is just the tools and ways I recommend people. So the ones that I prefer, the ones that I favor. Let's start with the putties. So we have here two categories. This is epoxy sculpt. You can see it there. This is Milliput, which I highly recommend you don't do this, because this, as you can see, oxidizes quite a bit. Same with epoxy, but we will get there. And this is green stuff, which I have in these two separate containers because it's just more comfortable. Epoxy and Milliput are basically the same. You can see it here how they essentially look the same. They behave the same way, they have the same properties, and they basically are the same. The main properties of this kind of putty is that they are water solvable. So you can actually clean the excess just using water, and even you can thin it down and create like a slurry that you can put into gaps and stuff like that. And it's a really useful thing for small gaps, like thin gaps. This is where this shines. I would use this kind of putty again to fill small gaps, thin gaps, and gaps that I know that I will have to sand down. If I can sand them down, this is perfect because this sands down very, very well. It dries rock solid and you can sand it and file it perfectly well. Then we have green stuff. Green stuff is the exact opposite. It's chewy, it's sticky, it's elastic, and very weird to work with if you are not used to it. It's one of those things that once you get used to it, you can exploit its weirdness to your advantage, but it's so hard to get how to use it that most people just give up on it. And it's a real shame because it's fantastic medium to work with. My main use for green stuff is for really large gaps, or if I need very organic shapes, or I need to sculpt a little bit because it's missing, you know, like those bad forge wall gaps or very organic like dragons and stuff like that. So if I need to sculpt to make it integrate with the miniature more, this is what I would use. So we have a hard sandable putty, especially used for small gaps, and a non-sandable putty that we can use for large gaps and to sculpt very organic shapes. Those are my two options. You can also use what they call a plastic slurry, but this is only for plastic models. For that, you would get something like this, that's Tamiya extra thin cement, and drop some plastic into it, pieces of sprue and stuff like that, that will melt down, creating a slurry that you can put over the gaps. I personally hate that method. I think it's the worst way of gap filling. I think it's messy. It just leaves all sorts of artifacts. It can deform your plastic pieces. It always requires sanding. You can't have a clean application of that slurry. It's always going to be messy, and then you will have to sand it down. So if you can't sand down that gap later on, it's useless. I know there are people that are going to get mad in the comments saying, oh, that's the best method or whatever. This is my video and this is my recommendation. Let's get into the tools. There are two types, metal tools and rubber tip tools, silicone tip tools, or whatever this is. I recommend you have at least two of both. These are my personal choice. One like a spatula kind of tool with a sort of a blade. It's not sharp or anything, but it's blade shaped, and one that looks like this, so sort of rounded. This is a Tiranti SG. I think it's an Italian brand, Tiranti SG. The flat tool is going to serve us to, for flat surfaces, to spread and stuff like that, and this will help us mold it, push it into small holes and stuff like that, a little bit of variety. All of these tools have two sides. As you can see, these are the other side. I never use these two sides apart from like scooping putty out of the containers. This is a very old sculpting tool. This was actually sold by GW like 20 years ago or more. This is again very, very old. It was my first sculpting tool that I ever bought, and it's still to this day one of my favorites. I just love this thing. I really hope it never breaks, because I will be very, very sad. We move into the rubber tipped tools. These are great especially for green stuff, because green stuff doesn't stick to this rubber surface. So the most annoying property of, and the most useful too, of green stuff, which is its stickiness, is avoided with this tool. So they are fantastic to move, displace. The only disadvantage is that because this is rubber or silicone, it doesn't have a lot of force, doesn't have a lot of strength to push really, really hard. That's why we need the metal tools, because we can really push with them. I highly recommend you get at least one flat tip and one round tip. The gray tips are softer, the black tips are harder. There is also like a white one that is extra soft. I really don't recommend. If you can get either the gray or the black ones, one flat and one round, that's more than enough. You might be tempted to buy this in like a super cheap version, like Green Stuff World or some shit like that. Please avoid it. They are awful. You are going to waste your money and regret it immediately. I highly recommend this brand. This is Royal Sovereign. They are sold either by Color Shaper or Clay Shaper, and they are fantastic. The black is extra firm, the gray is firm, and this size, the number 2s, for most models is more than enough, and you only need 2. It's really not that expensive. So why don't we start with the green stuff? And the first thing we have to do is mix it. And what a lot of people don't know is that depending on the ratio of the two components, you will get different properties. So the yellow side is what makes the putty sticky, as you can see. It's really, really sticky. While the blue part, it's harder and like firmer. So the more yellow you put in, the stickier and less firm the putty is going to be once it's dry. And the more blue you put in, the harder and like stronger the putty is going to be, like, you know, firmer it's going to be while you work it, and the less sticky it's going to be. We're just going to use a 50-50 because, well, we don't really need that much. When working with green stuff, the key is to use water. You see here I have a small container with a little bit of water. You don't need much. This is more than enough. And you have to wet your tools, your fingers, everything constantly, because it really wants to stick to absolutely everything. You don't need that much putty. And even if I say this, just know that you will mix more than you need. It's just part of what using green stuff is about. You will never mix the right amount. You will always mix way too much. So this is about 50-50, maybe a little bit more yellow. I kind of tend to like a little bit more yellow. It's just easier to stick to the model that way. And easier to form into shape. The problem is the tool marks will also showcase easier, but I think it's a good compromise. So now we have our fingers wet. I just put my finger in it, and you can see that both my fingers are now wet. You don't have to be dripping, okay, but they have to be wet, otherwise the putty will stick to your fingers. And it's going to create a mess. Once you start feeling like the putty is sticking again, just put your fingers again into the water and keep on mixing. I like to make like a sausage shape. The putty is starting to stick to my fingers again. I can feel it starting to get there. So I'm just going to put it on the model, and I'm going to use my clay shapers first to push the putty into the model. Why? Because the green stuff doesn't stick to the clay shaper. So I can manipulate it without any repercussions. If I use a metal tool, it's going to stick to my tool, so I will have to use water for it not to stick. What's the risk with that? Water can get in between the model and the putty, preventing a nice tight seal, a nice tight grip. That is a really common problem. It's just you are working with it and the putty just lifts off because it's not really stick down because it has so much water. So for me, the first step is always to use a clay shaper to make sure that the putty is nicely sticked to the model, that it has a firm grip. And once that is there, and I know that it's there, I can then use my metal tools to form it into shape. Of course, we don't want this, and there is way too much putty, so but it's easier to put too much and then remove it. We can go with our metal tool and push it around, moving it into the gap, which is at the very bottom of the head, and we can go and scoop up any of the extra residue of putty from the top of the head, just like that. Just like that. Don't be afraid, just take any pieces that fall and put them with the rest of the putty. This is the first stage. We're just making sure that our gap is completely filled. As you can see, we have plenty of water there, so our tools are not sticking at all. As you can see, I'm just working this putty into the gap, and it's now filled, but it's not smooth, and that's when the round clay shapers come into play again. We don't need water for this. The small amount of water that is there is going to be enough, and I'm just rubbing it, this one that is very sharp, against the putty that is there to make it super smooth. Just like that. And make it so it doesn't show any tool mark or anything. Look at that super smooth gap. And this is a really challenging area because we really can't do any post-processing where we have to get it smooth just by our initial sculpting work. So this is where green stuff shines for me. Let's do it once again in this awful hole that it has there at the barding of the horse. And I'm just going to put that there. It really wants to stick to my fingers now. Just be gentle with it. And I'm just going to use my clay shaper, in this case the flat one, to model it roughly into shape inside of that hole. I'm pushing it in, making sure I'm filling the whole thing with putty, just like that, and that I have a nice tight seal, and that I don't have any water, or that any water can get in between the putty and the model. Then I get my metal tool, and I'm going to use this one because this is a tight space, and I'm going to move it like this to try and take out as much of the unnecessary putty as I can. So like this, just like that. I put the excess putty there, I wet my tool again, and I am going in this direction, like sort of polishing the putty, so to speak, just like that. This would probably be enough. It's quite smooth, but if we want to make sure it's smooth, it's perfectly smooth, we can always go back to, as we talked about, the clay shapers. And we can push it and form it around. There you go. Perfect. Look at that gap. It just looks fantastic, like it was never there. As you can see, it's really easy to fill gaps with green stuff. A lot of people are really scared about this, but as with most good things in life, if you have enough lubrication and the right technique, you will have a great time. Let's now get into the Milliput. And as I said, this kind of putty is very different. First of all, as you can see, one of the sides, I think is the hardener, oxidizes quite a lot with the contact with the air. And this oxidized layer turns rock solid. It's not usable. So all of this putty that you can actually see, you can't really use. It's going to leave chunks. You can see here the gray putty. That's what we can use. And this is soft, while this is unusable. So don't do as I did. Keep the Milliput in the plastic that it comes in when you buy it. This is the last batch of the last bit of Milliput I have. I'm going to buy a new packet very soon. It's really cheap, so it's not a big deal. But learn from my mistakes and don't do this. Same happens with the epoxy, but this is actually the epoxy container. This is the container that the epoxy comes in from the factory. So there is no avoiding that. I highly recommend you scoop out like this, and you just take fresh putty from it. And these are interchangeable. I'm 100% sure that the hardener is basically the same thing across both putties. I'm just going to take a little bit of this, and to demonstrate it, I'm just going to use the hardener from one plus the filler or whatever it is from the other, and it's going to be just fine. Just making sure I have my tool clean so I don't have any of the residues. This is way different. It's like more powdery, more crumbly texture than the green stuff. Green stuff is like chewing gum. This really isn't. And although people recommend using water to mix it, I don't. You don't really need. It's going to stick to your fingers anyway, but if you introduce water, you're going to start diluting it down, and I really don't like it. So just go with it. Use some gloves if you feel like it. I've never done that before, but I'm pretty reckless with my own health. So do as I say, not as I do. Use some plastic gloves to at least mix it in. You have to mix it till both colors are turned into one. You don't have streaks of the two components. This is harder to do than with the green stuff because you can't really tell just by looking at it. Green stuff is very obvious when it's well mixed because it just turns green, but this, it really doesn't change that much. Both colors are very similar, and once they're mixed in, it looks very similar. And again, this is very crumbly. It's still sticky, but it's a different kind of sticky. Now, let me clean my hands as best as possible now that it's mixed. Let me take one of these containers to showcase one of the best properties of Milliput. Let me grab a piece of this Milliput, not very much, and let me add water into it. Just a little bit of water, and you will be able to see that it starts dissolving into the water. Just like that. Look at that. This is the best property of Milliput, and this is why we use Milliput to fill in small gaps. If you really want, you can mix quite a bit of that in there and create a sort of a slurry like that. You can also use alcohol instead of water to do this, and as the alcohol evaporates faster, this slurry will probably be more effective. This is a little bit of a slurry, and we can use either a very old brush or just one of our tools, and we can start moving it. As you can see, this is a very different experience, and the putty is not as sticky, not even close. It will feel difficult to use at first. Just keep on using water to thin it down a little bit, or alcohol, whatever you want to use. Just know that alcohol just doesn't react well with painted models, so you can't do this with you can't use alcohol, but you can use this to fill gaps in between painted parts very easily. And it might look like a mess, but again, this dissolves with water. What we can do is grab a synthetic brush, one that we don't really love that much, and we can use it just with a bit of water to clean the surface of this and just leave the putty. You really don't need that much water, and you can see this is a very, very different way of filling gaps, but this works fantastically well for small gaps, thin gaps, or as I said, on two painted parts. You sometimes paint models separately, then you go to join them down, and you see there is a gap in between the parts. This is the perfect putty because you can clean the putty from the painted surface, just like this, with a little bit of water, and leave virtually no residue in the parts. Just leave the putty in the gap. Just like that. One final pass with our brush to make sure everything is smooth with a little bit of water. Just like that. And boom. Perfect gap filling with no effort whatsoever. What you can also do, you can actually mix these two into a putty. So why don't we showcase that? We will get something in between. So a bit of the properties of the Milliput and a bit of the properties of the green stuff. Just know that in the moment you do this mix, the putty won't be water soluble anymore. But mixing these two together means that we can do hard edges easier, because green stuff is fantastic, but it's really not good to do like hard surfaces. So mixing both will actually get us there. And as you can see, it's a very messy process at the very beginning. It's still stretchy, but you can see it breaks down, which it wasn't doing before. So it's something in between both putties, something of a hybrid. But as I said, you won't be able to smooth this out with your water anymore. Like, it won't dissolve as the other does, but it might be easier to use in some cases. Let me just work with it. As you can see, it works more like green stuff than Milliput, because again, we can't dissolve it, which is the main thing with the Milliput, is that we can dissolve it with water. That's the key advantage of Milliput, which allows us to have like super smooth results. We can't do this with this putty, but if we're sculpting something, or we are filling gaps in something like armor and we need hard edges or like super flat surfaces, this might be a better compromise, especially if we have large gaps. But as you can see, I'm just working it as I did with the green stuff. Just like that. It's just less sticky, less unruly, and less stretchy overall, which for me is not a plus, but for some people, I know for some people it really is. As you can see, because it's less organic, you have to be more careful when sculpting it, so we don't leave hard edges or tool marks. And as we did before, we more or less form it into shape with water, and then we take a clay shaper and make everything smoother. You can see a perfectly smooth gap filled. We have green stuff here, which is better for large gaps and organic shapes, and Milliput just works better for thin gaps that you can just fill with the Milliput slurry and then just clean out with a stiff brush and leave the perfect smooth surface we want, and especially useful to join two painted surfaces. I know these videos are basic, but I also think it's very important to lay the foundations of our hobby well, so we can enjoy it fully. And I've seen so many frustrated people with putty that I truly believe this video is one of the most important I've ever made. In the next video of the series, we're going to look at brushes, talking about different brands, hair types, and brush care. Thanks again into the ARM for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to click the link in the description to get some amazing teas. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget that if you like my videos and want to help me make them, you can follow me on social media. You have the links to all my social media in the description below and in the pinned comment of this video. Share and like this video, but most importantly, there is Patreon and channel members. Patrons and members allow me to do all the cool videos that I want to make, and most importantly, they allow me to release them for free here on YouTube. Perks include access to an amazing Discord community full of lovely people, access to many more Patreon exclusive videos, and now also private one-on-one online tutorings. Help me and join the list of the coolest persons in the planet, including Daniel McCormack Smelt, Adam McGrade, Mac Angry, Max G, Dave Griffiths, Victor, Michael Sullivan, Corey Trickler, Pip-Boy, Lugubrious Cramhorn, Derek VW, Aredrus, John Michael Harkness, Soil Sijafet, Emilio Nguix, 3Gs, Marco Paratzik, James Coplin, Rogelio Thomas, Geek Daddy, Wandering Paria, Steve Fane, Quitango, TTSS Productions, Jay Huber, Minis by Eb, Benjeline, Emily Queen of Love, Nicholas Davis, Agon David, Pablo Cuesta, Benjamin Barbet, Pumpkin Hill, Chris Black, Jacob, Matthias Babiuk, Andrei Michensko, Aaron Miller, Jake Stein, Stefan Zimmerman, Andrew Walden, Tom, Dr. Mike, Martin Revera, Shishwal, PJM, David Ridey, Matt Wallace, Mark Carter, Hendrik, Chester Ross, Tyler Hughes, Chris Gilroy, Gilroy, Allman Gaming, Spacey Joe, Mark Watson, Hamish Donald, Matthew Lang, Star Wars Stavro, Mark G, Mike Regueira, Romain Ars Miniatura, Just Rex, Dr. Cathaver, Angelos Alexos, Des, Yusef Nicole Ancona, Mark Velencoop, Felix Franke, Aaron Bernstein, Daniel Ramin, Bowsy, Terry Denham, Planche, Tony, Biom, Howard Holdville, Stephanie All, Richard St. Pierre, Michael Wakeman, Stefan Rockford, Royal Nilsson, Oscar Jonathan Thornberg, Nin Nguyen, Dan Mako Cristalios, Bartosz Badensky, Kevin Mian, Darcy Farrar, Antius Maximus, Javi Mota, Eamon Patton, Adam Thaxton, Heather Amster, Mark Atkinson, Majarvis Fergal, Jeff Simpson, Christoph Moret, G-Force, Dr. V, Leonard Lindemann, Kieran Murther, Andrew Dyer, and Kevin Sules. And that's for me. I will catch you in the next one. Bye!